You were never built for my world, Ariel. Be grateful you got close to it. Preston Caldwell said those words like he was handing her a receipt, not ending a marriage. No anger in his voice. No shaking hands. No last-minute guilt. Just a white shirt buttoned at the collar, a navy suit jacket over one arm, and the kind of calm that made cruelty feel planned. Ariel Bennett stood in the doorway of their Atlanta townhouse with her wedding ring still on, staring at the man she had helped build from late-night takeout, overdue bills, and borrowed confidence. Outside, rain tapped against the porch light. Inside, the house smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink, because 3 hours earlier she had been reviewing his Series B pitch deck, fixing the same weak sentences he always pretended were brilliant on the first try. "Preston," she said, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. "You asked me to look at the investor notes this morning." He glanced at the folder on the kitchen island and almost smiled. "And you did. That does not make you a founder." The words landed quietly, but something in her chest folded in on itself. Ariel looked at the table where her laptop sat open, the screen still glowing with track changes, revenue notes, customer language, the story of his company shaped by her hands and saved under his name. She remembered the first office they could barely afford, a 600-square-foot rental above a dentist's office where the heat never worked right. She remembered staying up until 2 a.m. helping him rehearse for meetings while he paced the floor and said no one took him seriously. She remembered telling him where to pause, where to soften, where to sound less desperate. Now he stood in their kitchen acting like she had been furniture in the background of his success. "Is there someone else?" she asked, though she already knew from the new cologne, the hidden phone screen, the way he had started saying "my future" instead of "our future." Preston exhaled like she had embarrassed him by making it personal. "Claire understands the life I am moving into." Ariel's fingers curled around the edge of the counter. "And what life is that?" He looked around the townhouse, at the plants she watered, the framed photos she chose, the bills she managed when his first payroll almost bounced. A bigger one. He slid a thick envelope across the island. Divorce papers, bank notices, a settlement offer so thin it felt like an insult dressed up as paperwork. "This is clean," he said. "Do not make it ugly." For a second, Ariel could not speak. Her throat tightened, but no tears came. That scared her more than crying would have. Preston took her silence as defeat. He picked up his keys and headed for the door. Before leaving, he turned back and gave her one final look, the kind of man gives something he has already thrown away. "You will recover," he said. "People like you always find a way to survive." The door closed behind him, and the house went still. Ariel stood there with the envelope on the counter, the ring on her finger, and the laptop glowing beside the company he thought belonged only to him. Then, very slowly, she opened the folder, pulled out the first page, and saw he had forgotten one thing. Every version of his empire had passed through her hands before it ever reached his. 3 months after Preston walked out, he stood in a glass conference room 32 floors above Manhattan and told a room full of employees that every great company needed a founder willing to make painful sacrifices. Nobody in that room knew one of those sacrifices had been sitting alone in an Atlanta townhouse with divorce papers on the kitchen island and his company files still glowing on her laptop. Preston wore a charcoal suit, a silver watch, and the easy smile of a man who had practiced sounding humble. Behind him, the Caldwell Metrics logo stretched across a giant screen, clean and sharp, like it had never been built out of panic, unpaid invoices, and Ariel Bennett whispering better lines into his ear at 2 in the morning. "This next funding round is about discipline," Preston said, tapping the remote in his hand. "It is about vision. It is about knowing what belongs in your future and what has to stay in the past." A few people nodded. A few clapped. Claire Ashford sat near the front with her legs crossed and a cream-colored notebook balanced on her knee, smiling like she had personally invented his confidence. She had joined the company as head of brand partnerships 2 weeks after the divorce was filed, though everyone pretended the timing was normal. When Preston finished, she stood and touched his arm lightly. "That was perfect," she said, just loud enough for nearby staff to hear. "You sound like someone who is finally free." Preston gave a small laugh. "I am." Across the table, a junior marketing manager named Leah hesitated before raising her hand. "I had one question about the origin story slide," she said. "The customer language sounds different from the rest of the deck. It is stronger, more personal." Do we know who wrote the first version? The room quieted in that nervous way offices do when someone accidentally steps near the truth. Preston's smile did not move, but his eyes sharpened. I wrote it, he said. Leah looked down at her notes. Of course. I only asked because some of the old files have Ariel's initials on the comments. Claire's pen stopped moving. Preston set the remote on the table, slow and careful. Ariel had opinions, he said. I built a company. There is a difference. A soft laugh moved through the room, not because it was funny, but because people in offices often laugh when the most powerful person tells them to. Leah's face went pink. Right? I did not mean anything by it. Good, Preston said. Then let us not waste investor prep on my personal history. But the truth was already sitting there between the slides and the coffee cups. Ariel had named the first customer segments. Ariel had rewritten the pitch after 3 investors passed. Ariel had told Preston to stop selling software and start selling relief to overworked small business owners. He remembered all of it. He just did not believe memory counted as ownership. Later, alone in his office, Preston opened the old folder again. There she was in the margins. Make this warmer. Cut the arrogance. Tell them what problem you solved before you brag about scale. He stared at her notes for a long moment, then deleted her name from the file properties. Outside his door, Claire laughed with the sales team. Inside, Preston saved the document under a new title and convinced himself that was enough to erase her. What he did not know was that Ariel had kept the original. The original file stayed on Ariel's laptop like a match she refused to strike until she knew exactly where to aim the fire. For weeks, she did not post sad quotes, did not call old friends to explain herself, did not answer the polite messages from people who only wanted pieces of the story. She packed the townhouse in silence, moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on the west side of Atlanta, and sat at a folding table every morning with coffee, spreadsheets, and the kind of focus that comes when a woman finally stops asking why someone hurt her and starts asking what she is going to build next. The interview at Langston Vale Capital came on a rainy Tuesday. Ariel stood in the lobby with her old black portfolio pressed against her chest, watching men and women in tailored coats pass through security like they had been born knowing which elevator belonged to them. Her palms were cold, not because she doubted the work, but because rooms like this had a way of making women like her prove they were not lucky, emotional, or misplaced. The receptionist smiled. Miss Bennett, they are ready for you. Ariel took one breath, smoothed the front of her navy blazer, and walked in. 3 people sat behind a long table. At the center was Darius Langston, calm, sharp-eyed, with reading glasses folded beside a stack of reports. He did not smile too quickly. Ariel liked that. It meant he was actually listening. Your resume has a gap, one partner said, glancing down. After your consulting work, there is no official title connected to Caldwell Metrics. Can you explain that? Ariel felt the old shame rise. The shame Preston had tried to leave with her like another bill she was supposed to pay. She placed her portfolio on the table and opened it. I can, she said. I did not have a title there. I had responsibility. The partner lifted an eyebrow. That is a careful answer. It is an honest one. She slid forward a clean market analysis, a customer retention breakdown, and 3 pages of notes on small business software adoption across the Southeast. I helped shape the first customer story, pricing language, investor narrative, and early growth strategy. None of that was formal. All of it was real. For a moment, only the soft hum of the lights filled the room. Another partner leaned back. You understand how that sounds. You are recently divorced from the founder. Ariel looked at him directly. Yes, and because of that, I understand the difference between anger and analysis. This is analysis. Darius picked up the report. He read the first page, then the second. His expression changed slowly, not with surprise, but recognition. You flagged churn before revenue, he said. Most applicants lead with growth. Growth can lie, Ariel answered. Customer behavior usually tells the truth. Darius looked up then, fully. And what do you think makes a founder dangerous? Ariel thought of Preston deleting her name from files, smiling in rooms built partly from her labor, calling survival recovery like it was a small thing. Her voice stayed even. A founder becomes dangerous when he starts believing loyalty means nobody is allowed to question him. The room went quiet again. This time, nobody looked at her like an ex-wife trying to be heard. They looked at her like someone who had just named the risk they were paid to find. Darius closed the folder and leaned back. "One last question, Miss Bennett," he said. "How much of Caldwell Metrics was actually yours?" Ariel's fingers rested lightly on the edge of the table. She did not smile. She did not flinch. "Enough," she said, "to know where the cracks are." Darius did not offer Ariel a corner office or a dramatic second chance. He offered her a desk near the copy room, a company laptop, and a warning. "Around here, good instincts are useful," he told her on her first morning. "But clean work is what keeps people employed." Ariel nodded, set her purse beside the chair, and started with the files nobody else wanted. Outdated market scans, founder notes, customer interviews with names blacked out. She read everything. She stayed late when the office emptied and the cleaning crew rolled their carts past the glass walls. She learned how investors spoke when they liked a company, how they spoke when they did not, and how often the truth hid inside one number nobody bothered to question. 6 months passed that way. No speeches, no victory posts, no public glow-up for strangers to clap at. Just Ariel at her desk with coffee gone cold, hair pinned back, sleeves pushed up, rebuilding herself one report at a time. People began to notice. A partner would ask for her opinion before a call. Darius would slide a deck across the table and say, "Tell me what feels off." And Ariel would find it. A customer base that looked loyal until renewals came due. A founder who called debt strategic pressure. A revenue chart that rose too neatly, like someone had polished the bad news out of it. She did not call it talent. She called it remembering what it felt like to be lied to by someone who smiled while doing it. On a Thursday afternoon, the investment team gathered in the small conference room for a new deal review. Rain streaked the windows. Someone passed around sandwiches from a deli downstairs. Ariel opened her notebook, ready for another health tech platform or logistics company, until the first slide appeared on the screen and her hand went still. Caldwell Metrics. The logo looked the same, only sharper now, more expensive, cleaned up for people with money. For a second, the room blurred at the edges. She saw Preston in their old kitchen. She heard him say she was not built for his world. She felt the old ache rise under her ribs, quiet but familiar, like a bruise pressed by accident. Darius glanced at her from across the table, not with pity, with a question. Ariel lowered her eyes to the deck. "I am fine," she said before anyone asked. One of the associates began walking through the numbers. Strong growth, big pipeline, impressive founder-led sales. Ariel listened without moving. Then she turned the page and saw the retention table. Her pen stopped over one line. Enterprise renewals had been separated from overall churn, tucked inside an appendix where tired investors might miss it. She flipped back, then forward again. There it was. The company was not growing as cleanly as Preston claimed. It was running fast because it was losing ground behind itself. "Pause there," Ariel said. The associate looked up. "On which slide?" "Appendix C." Her voice sounded calm, almost too calm. They pulled churn out of the main story. The room shifted. Darius leaned back in his chair. "Meaning?" Ariel circled the number once, slow and deliberate. "Meaning Preston is selling confidence because he cannot afford questions." No one spoke for a moment. Outside, rain tapped against the glass. Inside, Ariel stared at the company her ex-husband thought he had taken from her, and for the first time, she did not feel small in front of it. She felt prepared. By the time Preston Caldwell announced his investor gala in New York, Ariel had already read enough to know the smile on his invitation was not confidence. It was pressure dressed in black tie. Caldwell Metrics needed money within 90 days, maybe less if the delayed contracts slipped again, and Preston was doing what he had always done when the floor felt weak beneath him. He polished the lights, raised the music, and made sure everyone was looking at the shine instead of the cracks. The event was held at a hotel near Bryant Park, all marble floors, tall windows, and glasses of champagne floating through the room on silver trays. Founders laughed too loudly. Investors shook hands like they were measuring each other. Reporters hovered near the step-in repeat, where Preston stood with Claire Ashford tucked beside him, both of them smiling as if they had already won. Claire wore winter white and diamonds that caught every camera flash. Preston wore the same expression Ariel remembered from their marriage, the one that said he believed the room belonged to him because no one had challenged him yet. Ariel arrived with the Langston Vale team in a simple black suit, her hair pulled back, a leather folder under one arm. No dramatic entrance. No limousine waiting outside. No need. Her name was on the review file, and that mattered more than any spotlight. Still, when she stepped into the ballroom, her stomach tightened. It was not fear exactly. It was memory. Preston by the kitchen island. Preston deleting her name. Preston telling her she would survive like survival was the smallest thing a woman could do. Darius walked beside her and lowered his voice. You good? Ariel looked across the room at the man who once mistook her silence for weakness. I am working, she said. That is different from being good. Before Darius could answer, Claire saw her. The smile came first, sweet enough for strangers and sharp enough for Ariel. She crossed the room with a glass in her hand. Ariel Bennett, Claire said. I did not realize they invited former spouses to investor events now. A few people nearby turned their heads. Preston followed the sound of Claire's voice, and when he saw Ariel, surprise flickered across his face before he covered it with amusement. Claire, he said softly, stepping in beside her, be kind. Recovery looks different for everyone. The words hung there. Small, polished, cruel. Someone near the bar gave a quiet laugh, then pretended to cough. Ariel felt heat rise under her collar, but her hands stayed still around the folder. Months ago, that sentence would have followed her home and sat beside her in the dark. Tonight, it only told her Preston was nervous enough to perform. She placed her glass of water on a nearby table, slowly, carefully, so it did not shake. You are right, Ariel said, looking at him with a calm that made his smile tighten. It does. Claire blinked, waiting for more, but Ariel gave her nothing else. That was the part Preston never understood. Ariel had finally learned that not every insult deserved her breath. A bell chimed near the stage, and the room began drifting toward the front. Preston adjusted his cuffs, lifted his chin, and walked toward the microphone like a man stepping into applause he believed he owned. Claire followed, still smiling, though her eyes kept sliding back to Ariel. Darius moved to the side of the stage and accepted a microphone from the event manager. Before we begin, he said, his voice steady enough to quiet the room, Langston Vale would like to introduce the person leading our investment review. Preston's smile stayed in place for one more second. Then the screen behind him changed. Ariel's name filled the screen in white letters against a dark blue background. Clean, simple, impossible to misunderstand. Ariel Bennett, lead investment strategist, Langston Vale Capital. For half a second, the ballroom did not react. People were still catching up, still trying to connect the woman Preston had just mocked with the name now glowing behind him. Then the silence changed. It became heavier, sharper, the kind of silence that makes every person in a room aware they have just witnessed a mistake. Preston stood near the microphone with his hand still resting on the stand. His smile did not fall all at once. It faded piece by piece, first from his eyes, then from his mouth, until all that remained was a man trying very hard not to look afraid in public. Claire's face went pale under the soft hotel lights. She turned toward Ariel, then back to the screen, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something less humiliating. Darius handed Ariel the microphone. The floor is yours, he said. Ariel took it with steady hands. Her heart was beating hard, but not out of panic. It was the feeling of standing at the edge of a life she had fought to earn. She walked to the front of the room, each step quiet against the polished floor. No one laughed now. No one whispered recovery like it was a weakness. Ariel looked out at the investors, the board members, the reporters, and finally at Preston. She did not smile. Good evening, she said. Langston Vale appreciates the opportunity to review Caldwell metrics ahead of this funding round. Tonight, I will keep this simple. Strong companies can survive hard questions. Weak ones hide from them. A few investors shifted in their seats. Preston cleared his throat. Ariel, perhaps we should keep the deeper financial review for the private session. She turned slightly toward him. Why? The room froze again. Preston gave a tight laugh. Because some details require context. Ariel clicked the remote. The first slide appeared. Revenue growth, customer retention, contract renewals. Then let us give them context. Her voice stayed calm, almost gentle, which made it worse for him. Your headline revenue grew 38% this year. Impressive on the surface. But enterprise renewals dropped by nearly 22%, and that number was moved out of the main deck and placed in Appendix C. Someone near the front leaned forward. Claire looked down at her notebook and stopped pretending to write. Preston stepped closer. That is a temporary fluctuation. Ariel clicked again. It has been trending for 3 quarters. The next slide showed customer acquisition costs. You are spending more to replace clients than to keep them. That is not momentum. That is leakage. Preston's jaw tightened. You are oversimplifying. Ariel met his eyes. No, Preston. I am reading the part you hoped no one would read. The words landed harder than any insult could have. Not because they were loud, but because they were true. Around the room, investors began checking their own copies of the deck. Board members exchanged glances. The story Preston had built for the night was slipping, one clean number at a time. Then Ariel opened the final slide. A company name appeared beneath a chain of vendor payments, consulting fees, and unusual transfers. Preston's face changed before anyone else understood why. Ariel saw it. The fear, the recognition, the crack in the man who thought he had erased every trace of her. She lowered the microphone slightly and said, "Now we need to talk about Ashford Strategic Partners." Claire's head snapped up. The room had no idea what that name meant yet. But Preston did. Preston did not wait for the applause that never came. The moment Ariel said Ashford Strategic Partners, he stepped toward the microphone with a smile, so tight, it looked painful. "That is a vendor relationship," he said. "Nothing more." Ariel kept her eyes on the screen. "Then it should be easy to explain why a company connected to Claire Ashford received consulting payments during the same quarter Caldwell Metrics delayed payroll taxes and cut customer support staff." The room shifted again, not loudly, but enough. A few investors looked at Claire. Claire sat very still, her hands folded over her notebook, the diamonds on her wrist suddenly looking less like glamour and more like evidence. Preston gave a short laugh. "This is inappropriate for a public setting." "I agree," Darius said from the side of the stage. His voice was calm, but the room obeyed it. "The formal review will continue privately." That was the first time Preston looked truly trapped. Not ruined yet. Not exposed completely. Just trapped enough to understand the doors were closing. 20 minutes later, he found Ariel in a private conference room behind the ballroom, away from the cameras, the music, and the people who had spent all evening pretending they were not watching him sweat. His smile was gone now. "What are you doing?" he asked. Ariel stood near the window, the city lights behind her, her folder tucked beneath one arm. "My job." "No," he said, lowering his voice. "This is personal." She turned to face him. "You made it personal when you laughed at me in front of your investors." His jaw tightened. "You came here to embarrass me." "Preston, you embarrassed yourself. I only asked about the numbers." He stared at her for a long second, then softened his tone like he was reaching for an old key. "Ariel, come on. We built something together once. You know how hard those early years were. You know what this company means to me." For a moment, she saw the old apartment above the dentist's office. Cold pizza on paper plates. Preston pacing in socks, terrified before his first investor call. Herself on the couch, rewriting his opening line until he sounded like the man he wanted to be. The memory hurt, but it did not move her backward. "I know what it meant to me too," she said. "That never stopped you from erasing me." He looked away first. Before he could answer, the door opened and Marisol Vega stepped in, sharp in a gray suit, carrying a legal folder that looked heavier than it was. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "Langston Vale is still willing to consider investment under revised terms." Preston blinked. "Who are you?" "Ariel Bennett's counsel." Marisol placed the folder on the table. "The terms are simple. Independent audit. Full disclosure to the board. Restructure of vendor contracts. Temporary removal of executive spending authority. And you step down as chief executive officer until the review is complete." Preston stared at the folder as if it had insulted him. "You are trying to take my company." Ariel's voice stayed quiet. "No. I am trying to save the parts of it you have not ruined yet." The words hit him harder because she did not sound angry. She sounded finished. Preston pushed the folder back. "I will never sign that." Marisol picked it up without surprise. "Then the board will receive our recommendation in the morning." He looked at Ariel one last time, waiting for the woman who used to soften first. She did not. By midnight, while Preston was still calling directors and trying to control the story, every member of the board received an email from an address no one recognized. Attached were the original vendor contracts, the deleted file history, and one document Preston had forgotten existed. Ariel's first marked-up pitch deck, with her name still in the margins. By 8:15 the next morning, The boardroom at Caldwell Metrics felt nothing like the ballroom from the night before. There were no cameras, no champagne, no soft music to cover the silence. Just a long walnut table, a wall of glass overlooking Manhattan, and 12 people pretending they had not opened the midnight email more than once. Preston arrived last. That was not like him. Usually, he entered rooms early, so everyone else had to walk into his confidence. This time, his tie was slightly crooked, his phone stayed in his hand, and his eyes moved too quickly from face to face. Claire sat near the far end of the room, dressed in pale blue, her mouth pressed into a careful line. She did not look at him. That told Ariel almost everything. Ariel sat beside Darius and Marisol on the investor side of the table, a printed binder in front of her, a bottle of water untouched near her right hand. Her body was calm, but inside, she could feel every year of being dismissed pressing against this moment. She remembered standing behind Preston before investor calls, straightening his collar, telling him he was ready. Now he stood across from her, waiting for the room to save him from the truth she had finally brought into daylight. The board chair, Elaine Mercer, opened the meeting without small talk. Mr. Caldwell, we received documents last night that raised serious concerns about reporting, vendor payments, and intellectual contribution history. Preston let out a controlled breath. Elaine, anonymous emails should not guide corporate governance. Marisol slid a folder forward. That is why we verified the attachments before this meeting. Preston looked at her, then at Ariel. Of course you did. Ariel did not answer. She had learned that silence could be a wall when used correctly. Elaine turned to the screen. The first document appeared, vendor payments to Ashford Strategic Partners. The second, delayed payroll tax notices. The third, file metadata from Caldwell Metrics' earliest pitch materials, showing Ariel Bennett's comments, edits, and original strategic language. A board member named Thomas leaned forward, squinting at the screen. Preston, why was this contribution never disclosed? Preston gave a quick, polished shrug. Because informal feedback from a spouse is not the same as founding work. Ariel felt the old insult try to find a place inside her, but it could not settle anymore. Elaine looked at her. Miss Bennett, would you like to respond? Ariel lifted her eyes. No. The documents respond clearly enough. The room went still. Not cold. Not hostile. Just awake. Darius spoke next. Langston Vale is prepared to move forward only if the company agrees to an independent audit, revised governance, and an interim chief executive officer. Mr. Caldwell cannot remain in operational control during review. Preston's chair scraped lightly against the floor as he stood. You are all letting my ex-wife turn a business review into revenge. For the first time that morning, Ariel looked directly at him. Revenge would have been letting you keep lying until the company collapsed. No one laughed. No one rescued him. Claire stared down at her hands. Elaine called for the vote. One by one, the board members gave their answer. Yes, yes, yes. Each word landed softly, but Preston seemed to shrink with every one. When the final vote passed, Elaine closed the folder in front of her. Effective immediately, Preston Caldwell is placed on administrative leave pending review. Preston looked around the room, waiting for loyalty, fear, anything familiar. What he found instead was the one thing he had never prepared for. People choosing the truth over his version of it. As everyone began to stand, he called out, Ariel. She paused, but she did not turn around right away. His voice dropped. Was this worth it? Ariel finally faced him. There was no smile on her face, no victory pose, no need to make the room smaller for him the way he had once done to her. Yes, she said, because I am not the only person you almost cost everything. Then she walked out with the binder in her hand, leaving Preston in the boardroom he used to own, surrounded by people who had finally stopped clapping. 3 months later, Ariel Bennett stood in a corner office that still felt too quiet to trust. The windows looked down over Manhattan, where yellow cabs moved like tiny sparks between the buildings, and people hurried through crosswalks with coffee in one hand and their whole lives pressing on their shoulders. On her desk sat no wedding ring, no old bank notices, no envelope from a man who thought he could decide the size of her future. There was only a framed copy of the first investment memo she had led, a small plant from Marisol, and the same old black portfolio she had carried into Langston Vale on the day her hands would not stop feeling cold. Caldwell Metrics had survived, but it no longer moved around Preston's ego. The audit cleaned out the hidden contracts. Customer support was rebuilt. The board appointed an interim chief executive officer who listened more than he performed. People who had been afraid to speak began sending Ariel quiet messages. Thank you for asking the question nobody wanted to ask. Thank you for making the room honest. She read each one, then saved them in a folder she named Proof of Life, because that was what they felt like. Not proof that Preston lost. Proof that the truth could still breathe after being buried. That afternoon, an email from Preston appeared at the top of her inbox. The subject line was simple. Can we talk? Ariel stared at it for a long moment before opening it. His message was not long. He said he had been wrong. He said losing the company had forced him to see things clearly. He said he missed the version of them before everything became complicated. Ariel leaned back in her chair and let the words settle without letting them take root. Once, a message like that would have pulled her apart. She would have searched every sentence for the man she thought she married. She would have wondered if regret could be mistaken for love. Now she understood something she wished every woman learned before the breaking point. Sometimes people miss you only after the door they used to walk through is locked. Her phone buzzed. Marisol was downstairs. Dinner? You earned real food and not desk almonds. Ariel smiled for the first time that day. She typed back, coming down. Then she looked at Preston's email again. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She did not write a speech. She did not list every wound. She did not try to make him understand a pain he had chosen not to notice when it mattered. She typed one sentence. I hope you become honest enough to build a life that does not require someone else to disappear. Then she sent it and closed the laptop. Outside her office, the evening light softened the hallway. Darius passed by, holding a stack of files. Good work today, Bennett, he said. Not just the numbers. The way you handled all of it. Ariel nodded. I used to think being strong meant not feeling anything. Darius paused. And now? She picked up her coat. Now I think it means feeling it, and still not handing your life back to the person who broke it. When Ariel stepped out of the building, the air was cold enough to sting her cheeks. She wrapped her coat tighter and walked into the city with steady steps. No cameras followed her. No music swelled. No one on the sidewalk knew what it had cost her to become this calm. But that was all right. Not every victory needs an audience. Some victories are quiet. Some happen when a woman stops begging to be seen by the person who benefited from her silence. Some begin the moment she realizes recovery does not mean becoming who she was before the pain. It means becoming someone wiser, freer, and harder to erase. Preston had thought Ariel would spend the rest of her life trying to recover from losing him. In the end, he was the one who never recovered from underestimating her.